Without John Jackie Knows Domenico, the Gambino crime family wouldn't be where it is today, as his influence over 3 decades shaped the direction of the family, which included a shift of power from the Queen's faction back to the historically dominant Brooklyn faction of the family. With that, you saw the rise of the Sicilian faction from drug traffickers and pizzeria and cafe owners to running the family. We'll discuss Jackie Knows' rise as a soldier in the Gambino's family's oldest crew going back over 100 years to his true friendship with John Gotti, which involved him being both a confidant and a friend. His unlikely rise to capital regime and finally street boss is discussed, and how his influence is still felt today through his mentoring of several members of the Gambino administration. If you're fascinated by organized crime like I am, please hit the like button and show your support by subscribing to Real Mob Stories. I'm your host, James Proctor, and without further delay, on to our feature presentation. John Domenico was born in 1936 in Manhattan to Sicilian immigrants from Palermo. Domenico had the nickname Nose because of his large Roman nose. His large nose was always a source of disdain, and fellow mobsters didn't use that nickname around him. We're told that Jackie Knows attended New Utrecht High School as a youth and was good friends with Irving Hal Hershkowitz. In later years, Hal became the founder of the Big Geyser Beverage Company and gave Jackie Knows jobs so he could have health care benefits and a reportable salary. Jackie Knows started as an associate within the Gambino family in the early 1960s and was part of Olimpio Lilo Garofalo's crew. He was also close to Charlie Dongera, a Manhattan guy who would hang out at Di Roberti's bakery. Garofalo's crew was one of New York City's most infamous Cosa Nostra organizations going back to the 1920s in Salvatore Toto D'Aquila. This crew had a lineage of influential figures, starting with the crew's early captain, Vincenzo Jimmy Di Leonardo. When Jackie Knows was an associate, the crew was mostly old-timers and was involved in typical street-level crimes such as gambling and loan sharking. Jackie Knows was a bookmaker with a modest income stream. In 1976, the books were open, and in the mid to late 1970s, Garofalo sponsored both Jackie Knows and Michael Mickey Paradiso, and they would get straightened out. Garofalo was getting older, and you had Paulie Zaccaria as a acting capo. By the early 1980s, Mikey Scars Di Leonardo joined the crew and became close with Domenico. When John Gotti became the boss of the Gambino family, Jackie Knows became the capo of the Garofalo crew. One of the ongoing problems with his crew was its ability to make money. Younger gangsters like Mikey Scars were making money, but many of the old-timers were not, and this was brought up on various occasions by John Gotti. As a capo regime, Jackie Knows was required to come in weekly to the Ravenite Social Club. Initially, Jackie Knows was subjected to some abuse by John Gotti, but after a while they became good friends. They shared a love for gambling and were both extroverts who liked being around people. Jackie Knows spent money as soon as he got it, but would go out with John Gotti, and he's sometimes a driver for him. Many photos of the Gotti era would show Jackie Knows in the photos with him. Around the time of John Gotti's rise as boss, he elevated John Gambino, a distant relative of the former Don Carlo Gambino, to oversee the Sicilian faction of the family. The Sicilian faction of the family was centered around 18th Avenue in Bensonhurst. John Gambino and his brothers Joseph and Rosario arrived in the U.S. in the mid-1960s as a part of a new wave of Sicilian immigrants settling in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. In 1966, John and Joe Gambino ran the Cafe Giordano on 18th Avenue, known for its authentic espresso and Italian lounge singers. Not far was another cafe owned by another Sicilian immigrant, Salvatore Catalano, who had arisen in the Bonanno family, who had opened the Cafe Viale. The Gambino brothers and Catalano were friends and often visited one another. In 1972, John Gambino and the brothers started Father and Son Pizza and ran pizzerias in Philadelphia and Camden, which ended up being part of the Pizza Connection. At its peak in the early 1980s, the Pizza Connection had 240 pizzerias, bringing in $250 million a year annually, mainly through the sale of heroin. In the early 1980s, the Enzerillo clan was decimated in Sicily, and many of these Sicilian men of honor came to the United States. However, Paul Castellano was concerned about upsetting Salvatore Todorena, boss of the rival Corione faction. He ended up breaking down many of the Sicilians and putting them under Jimmy Brown Fialas, and later John Gambino was part of Tommy Bellotti's crew. However, John Gotti brought things back to how they were before, and John Gambino became the captain of the Sicilian crew. The importance of the Sicilian faction and how it involved Jackie Knows will become apparent very soon as we continue with his rise in power. John Gotti achieved power through a coalition that included his guys in Queens and also selected guys in Brooklyn like Frank DeCicco, who was respected by both the old-timers and Gotti's Young Turks. The John Gotti reign on the street was only 5 years, and much of that time involved court cases. On December 11, 1990, John Gotti would see his last day on the street, as he is arrested along with his underboss, Sammy Gravano, and consigliere Frank Lacasio. Interestingly, Jackie Knows and John Gotti had plans to go to a Frank Sinatra concert the next day if he hadn't been arrested. Gotti knew that this day might arrive when he was picked up off the street, so the Gambino family had a contingency plan to keep the Borgata running. Gotti's long-term plan was to have his son take over as boss, but he knew he wasn't ready then, so he wanted to surround Junior Gotti with people who would give him proper guidance and loyalty. A ruling panel that consisted of some of the more prominent capital regimes of the family was established. This first ruling panel included John Gotti Jr., James Jimmy Brown Faala, Louis Valario, Peter Gotti, and Jackie Knows. The ruling panel would continue throughout the 1990s as John Gotti was convicted and put away for life. Some of the members would change, but Junior Gotti, Peter Gotti, and Jackie Knows would be on this panel throughout this time. John Gambino would be running the 18th Avenue crew, but he and his brothers would have problems with the Fed, starting with Operation Iron Tower in 1988, where Joe Gambino, who was the owner of Cafe Giardino, was arrested. John was able to avoid arrest this time, but the next year John gets arrested, and his indictments keep on piling up on John Gambino and his brothers. They end up going on the run and hiding out in Florida. Around 1992, Jackie Knows, who was running the old Garofalo crew, would now have the 18th Avenue crew. So the Sicilian faction would be under Jackie Knows. With the Gambino brothers facing serious legal issues and off the street, he had several young Sicilians who were running wild on the street. The children of the Gambino brothers would be running the cafes and they needed guidance. Jackie Knows and Mikey Scars de Leonardo would mentor these kids off 18th Avenue. One of these young Sicilians would rise above others as a smart, savvy gangster and moneymaker. His name was Frank Cali. Although Frank Cali was born in the United States, he would become tied to the Gambino brothers and the Inzerillos in Sicily through his marriage to Rosaria. This would make John Gambino Frank's uncle-in-law. Jackie Knows would become more and more prominent within the Gambino family as the family was suffering from law enforcement arrests and a lack of stable leadership at the top. John Gotti Jr. was the acting boss, but he was well over his head as several capitalist regimes tried to run things their own way. Frank Cali was seen as a capable moneymaker. One of the most profitable scams in Cosa Nostra's history involved the sale of calling cards. These cards would be bought, let's say, at $20, and the cards would only have a percentage of the $20, maybe $5 or $10. Millions were raked in this scheme that was actually led by the longtime powerful Gambino associate, Joe Watts. It's around this time that Jackie Knows finally achieved wealth. His crew was involved in Manhattan and Brooklyn schemes such as the phone card scams, and later through Mikey Scars infiltrated Wall Street on pump and dump scams. In addition, the crew in Connecticut was under Jackie Knows and was more into traditional street rackets and some racketeering. However, in 1998, things catch up with Jackie Knows and he's charged with racketeering and loan sharking. In 1999, Jackie Knows got a 20-month sentence for pleading guilty to operating an illegal gambling operation in Connecticut. Jackie Knows got out of prison in September 2001, and then in 2002, John Gotti passed away from cancer. By this time, Junior Gotti was no longer in the life, so the torch was passed to John Gotti's brother, Peter Gotti. Around this same time of John Gotti's death, Jackie Knows is devastated to learn that his longtime friend, Mikey Scars de Leonardo, flipped and became a cooperating witness. Mikey Scars would become an effective witness, providing damaging testimony in several trials involving the Gambino family, including 4 mistrials of John Gotti Jr. In 2003, Peter Gotti was convicted of extortion, money laundering, and racketeering activities, including the attempted extortion of actor Steven Seagal. With Peter Gotti in prison, Jackie Knows is the acting boss of the Gambino family. By this time, Frank Cali's made a capital regime, and many of the guys in prison from the Sicilian faction were getting out. Jackie Knows was supportive of the Sicilian faction and saw its importance. Frank Cali would be a liaison to the old world and was respected and liked by the Sicilians. Sicilians would come to the U.S. and meet with Cali. The Italian Polizia di Stato started hearing the name Frankie Boy and Frank Cali and realized he was a powerful American mafioso. Informants were telling Italian law enforcement that Frank Cali was combined, which means he was made in both the Sicilian Mafia and U.S. Cosa Nostra, but there's no evidence of this. Sicily was changing because Totorina was in prison, and the Inzerillos were regaining some of the territory and power it had lost in the 1980s. Drug trafficking again became a source of income for the Gambino family through these connections. Besides the rise of Frank Cali, Jackie Nose became close to another Sicilian Faction member named Domenico Cefalu, known as Dom from 18th Avenue. Cefalu was a low-key old heroin guy and was part of Patsy Conti's Sicilian crew in Manhattan. He spent 8 years in prison in the 1980s, and when he got out in 1990, he got straightened out. Cefalu was known for his loyalty and keeping his mouth shut. He spent 33 months in prison for refusing to testify against his capo, Patsy Conti, during the 1990s. In 2005, Jackie Nose made Cefalu his underboss and heir apparent. He would be overseeing the Sicilian faction of the family. Jackie Nose is also close with the Corazzo brothers, Lil Nick and Jojo Corazzo, who would be his concierge. Things run pretty smoothly until 2008, when the feds strike at the heart of the Gambino family with Operation Old Bridge. Operation Old Bridge was a major law enforcement crackdown on the Gambino crime family, resulting in arrest in Italy and the United States on February 7, 2008. The operation targeted key Gambino figures, including acting boss Jackie Domenico, Lil Nick Corazzo, and Jojo Corazzo. The charges include murder, drug trafficking, robbery, and extortion. The FBI built its case using informant Joseph Valario, a Staten Island trucking company owner who secretly recorded conversations with Gambino members. Over 80 people were indicted, with the case designated as United States of America versus Agate. Nicholas Corazzo fled after being tipped off by his daughter, but later surrendered on May 29, 2008. 60 out of 62 American defendants pleaded guilty, and most of them received sentences of 3 years or less. The operation disrupted an alliance between the Gambinos and the Sicilian Mafia, particularly the Inzerillo crime family, which sought to expand its role in the drug trade. Frank Cali, a Gambino captain and alleged U.S. ambassador for the Inzerillos, were also among those arrested. The operation's name Old Bridge referred to historical ties between the Inzerillo Mafia family and the Gambinos. After the Second Mafia War in the 1980s, the Inzerillos had fled Sicily to New York under the protection of their American relatives. They were allowed to settle in the U.S. with the condition that they never returned to Sicily. However, by the 2000s, with Sicilian boss Rina and Provenzano in prison, the Inzerillos attempted to reestablish their transatlantic criminal network, leading to the FBI and Italian authorities stepping in. This operation significantly disrupted drug trade connections between the Sicilian and American underworld, at least temporarily. Jackie Nose would plead guilty to extorting a cement company out of $100,000 and was sentenced on August 18, 2008 to 2 years in prison, which he would serve at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. Jackie Nose was going to get released early in November of 2009, but he gets charged with arranging the 1989 Fred Weiss murder. Fred Weiss was a Gambino associate who was involved in illegal dumping, and he ended up getting pinched. John Gotti was concerned that Weiss would flip, so a contract was ordered on Fred Weiss. Initially, the contract was given to Jackie Nose and his crew to handle, along with Joe Watts, but after unsuccessfully luring him, John Gotti talks to Cavalcante crime boss John Riggi, who takes the contract as a favor for Gotti, and Fred Weiss ends up getting taken out on September 11, 1989. Jackie Nose pleads and gets 3 years added to his time at the MCC. While Jackie Nose is in prison, the Sicilian faction firmly controls the Gambino family. In 2011, Peter Gotti was stripped of his role as boss since he's serving life in prison. With Jackie Nose in prison, Cefalu's elevated from acting boss to boss. Jackie Nose is fine with the change as he wants to slow down when he exits prison. With Cefalu in charge as boss, John Gambino is out of prison and is a capo regime. Cefalu puts Frank Cali and Lorenzo Menino as his right-hand men in administration. Menino was close to the Gambino brothers and had participated in the murder of Francisco Oliveri, which took place due to a dispute between Oliveri and John Gambino. Menino gets 15 years for the murder, keeps his mouth shut, and gets made once he gets out of prison. The transition is now complete, with the Queen's faction out of power, and the power base back in Brooklyn with the Sicilian Faction. Jackie Nose got out of prison in 2012, and he's now more of an elder statesman for the administration of the Gambinos. He's no longer with the crew, but it's more out of choice than any issue with the administration. Through Jackie Nose, Cefalu and Frank Cali achieved their power, and the relationship was always strong. Jackie Nose lives out the remainder of his time out of prison and sleeping in his own bed. He never loses his status and is respected by everybody in the family. On December 27, 2023, John Domenico died from natural causes at the age of 87. As we conclude the story of Jackie Nose Domenico, we see a man who stands out with his colorful personality, close ties to John Gotti, and deep connection to the family's past. He learned from some of the most influential members of Cosa Nostra, and he in turn helped to groom the next generation of Gambino gangsters. He is a man who maintained his integrity and influence through decades of Mafia turmoil, which is a testament to his deep roots and strategic alliances. Navigating modern mob politics is difficult, but Jackie Nose did well. Even as the Gambino family faced legal crackdowns and shifting leadership, Jackie Domenico remained a symbol of continuity, linking to the original Sicilian roots of the American Cosa Nostra. Jackie Nose Domenico's role as a capo regime and later an acting boss was more than about just power. It was about preserving a legacy. Through his leadership, the family survived, navigating the volatile landscape of New York's mafia world with a blend of old-school honor and strategic modernism. His story is not just one of a mobster, but of a custodian of history, ensuring that the roots of the Gambino family stayed strong, even as the world changed. Thank you again for watching this show, and until next time, take care, stay safe, and God bless you always.